Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Thursday, October 16th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, taking a closer look at a Supreme Court case on redistricting. Plus, Trump says he's considering strikes on land to combat Venezuelan drug cartels, and how the shutdown is leaving many military families in limbo. In one of its biggest cases of the year, the Supreme Court yesterday debated about whether electoral districts can be created to protect the voting rights of minorities without discriminating against voters of other races. I spoke with USA Today Supreme Court correspondent Maureen Grappi for a closer look. Thanks for joining me, Maureen.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So what is at issue in this case, and how was it brought to the High Court?
This case stems from a multi-year battle over Louisiana's congressional districts. The state had to draw new boundaries after the last census to account for population shifts in its 6 House districts. But the map that they drew included only one district where a majority of the voters were Black, even though Blacks make up about 1/3 of the state's population. So a group of Black voters sued under the Voting Rights Act. That's a civil rights statute that was passed in 1965. And one of its provisions tries to prevent dilution of the political power of racial minorities by either packing them into as few districts as possible, or what's called cracking, or spreading them out among so many districts that their votes have less impact. The state was told by the courts that the congressional map with just one majority Black district probably violated that law. But when the state then created a new map with 2 majority Black districts, non-Black voters sued, saying it discriminated against them. The Supreme Court already heard arguments in this case last term, but they couldn't reach a decision. So they asked the lawyers to come back and to specifically address whether intentionally creating a second majority Black district violates the Constitution.
All right, good breakdown for us there. Another round of arguments, as you mentioned, Maureen. What stood out to you from those arguments yesterday?
Well, all eyes were on Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and that's because those 2 conservative justices joined with the 3 liberal justices 2 years ago in a similar challenge to Alabama's congressional map. And if just one of those 2 sees this case differently than the white voters who are challenging Louisiana's second majority Black district, then they win. Kavanaugh asked a lot more questions than Roberts did, and he did seem to be open to making some changes to how the Voting Rights Act is applied, even if it didn't seem like he necessarily would go as far as the challengers in this case would like him to.
Well, you touched on this a bit, Maureen, but really what are some of the broader implications here for the American people?
Well, the potential impact of the case, you're right, it does go beyond Louisiana. The court could limit how racial minorities, not just Blacks, but Latinos, for example, how they can challenge legislative maps as discriminatory. And that would make a difference in many states, and not just at the congressional level, but at all levels of government.
And how about the potential political implications here?
If the court makes it harder for racial minorities to challenge a legislative map, then that could give Republicans a political boost. The Republicans right now have a very slim majority in Congress, and just this one extra seat from Louisiana, for example, could help them keep control of the House. Beyond Louisiana, the court's decision could give a green light to other states to redo their congressional maps, which would also be expected to help Republicans keep control of the House.
So we heard these arguments, Maureen. What's next? Where does this go from here?
So we wait for a decision, and the timing of that decision is important. If the justices take the maximum amount of time to write an opinion, which would mean we wouldn't get it until June, that wouldn't come in time to have a big impact on next year's midterm elections, but it would affect elections after that.
All right. Maureen Grappi covers the Supreme Court for USA Today. Thanks, Maureen.
Hey, thank you.
President Donald Trump said he's considering U.S. military strikes on land targets to combat the flow of drugs from Venezuelan cartels into the country. That comes after 5 recent maritime attacks on alleged drug smuggling boats. Trump's latest remarks also follow a New York Times report that his administration has secretly authorized the Central Intelligence Agency to conduct covert action in Venezuela in an escalation of its campaign against Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro's regime. Trump confirmed the report, saying the action is in response to Venezuelan migrants and drugs entering the United States. A federal judge in California has ordered the Trump administration to temporarily halt layoffs that were announced last week and more that are pending and blamed on the government shutdown. The American Federation of Government Employees had sued to block 4,000 layoffs already announced, along with more that President Donald Trump announced would happen tomorrow. The union argued the layoffs were unlawful because they were arbitrary and capricious. The government opposed halting the layoffs, arguing a lawsuit was unnecessary because workers could appeal their dismissals administratively to the Merit Systems Protection Board instead of through the courts. A U.S. district judge temporarily halted all layoffs imposed or pending and expects another hearing within 2 weeks on whether to extend the block longer. The government shutdown is leaving many military families anxious about their next paychecks. I spoke with USA Today national security and world affairs reporter Sibel Mays-Osterman for more. Thanks for joining me, Sibel.
Thanks so much, Taylor.
So just starting here with some of the latest, how has the shutdown impacted the military and military pay?
So the military were paid on October 1st at the beginning of this month, which was the day that the shutdown began. But as soon as it started, they were thrown into uncertainty about their next paycheck, which was due on October 15th. The military is paid bi-monthly. And so in that interim time, there was a lot of anxiety going around about what was going to happen with that next pay date. Now, Trump announced earlier last week, actually on October 11th, he said that he had directed Defense Secretary Excerpt to find funds to pay these troops. And the Pentagon told me in a statement that they had repurposed some other funds that were going to be used for research and development purposes, $8 billion worth, to pay troops this time around. I've heard from a lot of active duty troops that have been paid, but there are still questions, especially around troops that are in the reserves or people who are, for example, Defense Department civilian employees and aren't in the military might be missing out on paychecks.
All right, good explainer there. I know you spoke with some families in a military-heavy community in Virginia, right, Sibel? What did you hear from them about this stressful moment and how they're navigating it?
Oh, well, people are really going through it right now. You can imagine if you didn't know where your next paycheck was coming from, if you didn't know that it was going to hit your bank account, how you might be facing down new financial decisions. I heard from people that they were, checking the prices of toilet paper for the first time. People were taking out loans. Luckily, there are some credit unions for the military, specifically like Navy Federal, that have given people interest-free loans. But people are still looking at having to make tough choices, like how they're going to pay for their kids' extracurricular activities or how they're going to continue to pay for private schools, those kinds of things, their future medical procedures and surgeries.
You mentioned some of the credit union help. How are local communities really stepping up to help?
Yeah, well, we've heard that there's been news reports around the country that food banks have seen a surge in people coming to them since the shutdown began, not just military members, but federal workers as well. In the area that I visited in Hampton Roads, where there's a huge amount of the population is federal workers and also military, there have been food banks that are announcing distribution times. There's churches that I've heard that also are stepping up and offering to help military members in need.
All right, so where do we go next, Sibel? I know the shutdown is ongoing. Are there any resolutions down the pike when it comes to military pay? Where do we go next?
It's still up in the air. We heard the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, made a comment just on October 15th. He said, we don't know what's going to happen with the next pay date that's coming in 2 weeks. And that seems to be up in the air. Since there hasn't been a bill that's been passed to actually pay the troops, these funds that went into paying active duty troops on the 15th seem to be just a one-time thing. So, this is still in flux.
All right. Sibel Mays-Osterman covers national security and world affairs for USA Today. Thank you, Sibel.
Thanks so much, Taylor.
And later today on the Excerpt, President Trump's deployment of the National Guard has drawn fierce backlash from governors and legal experts. But are these troops even trained for what they're being sent to do?
They're trained for combat, right? And they're not trained in the complexities of civilian law enforcement, which includes having to understand things from criminal procedure to civil rights to, how to handle a civilian crowd.
USA Today breaking news reporter Michael Loria sat down with my colleague Dana Taylor to explain why these deployments could backfire and what it says about the limits of presidential power. You can hear that conversation right here, beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your pods. And you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.
you.